Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was March 24th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt cara companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document provides a really fascinating window into some of the money stress that faced Joan and Violante pretty much right away and continued to plague their reign. So this particular document is from Joan, and it is about Sardinia, the island of Sardinia. It's in the secret seal register, and it's being addressed to, interestingly, the Archbishop of Zaragoza. Well, I guess that makes sense, actually, now that I think about it. And then a couple other individuals who have some kind of official role in, I think, raising the money. So this is about raising money. And the reason that, and I initially forgot this, that it's addressed to the Archbishop of Zaragoza is that the money is going to be coming from some kind of ecclesiastical process. So there's some kind of tithe that can be imposed that is authorized by the Pope and will be administered by the ecclesiastical officials in Zaragoza. And that money, I mean, there's really no religious justification for it at all. It's going to be used in order to send soldiers to the island of Sardinia. And so this is the whole purpose of this document, is to inform the ecclesiastical officials in Zaragoza that they need to collect this money and that it's really urgent that they do so, because those soldiers, they need to get paid. Alright, well, that explains the addressee, and the content of the letter requires quite a lot of historical context to understand. But before we get into the history of Sardinia and the larger Mediterranean picture for the Crown of Aragon in the 14th century, I just want to make a little paleographical note. The beginning of this document is at the very bottom of folio 29R, and there's just two lines there. The second line has Isla de Sardinia, and sometimes Isla means island, and other times it doesn't. Like, there's the word Isla, to me, is still a little bit confusing, and I'm definitely going to ask about this in the seminar on medieval Catalan that I'm taking over the summer. Well, Isla can also mean, like, region, I think. Or it can be, like, a metaphorical in its, like, island meaning. Yeah, I'm just not sure. So, when I saw the capital C, and it's clearly a capital C in Sardinia, I immediately thought that this was about a region called Sardinia, which is near the Pyrenees. And I was very reluctant to see this as about the island of Sardinia. The initial transcription result that I got from Gemini was a really strong correction on me, saying that there's no way that this is Sardinia. This is definitely Sardinia. And I was reluctant to go along with that because that is a capital C, and I just am like, no, it would be an S if it was Sardinia. So I actually went to ChatGPT and asked it, hey, can you look through and see if Sardinia is ever spelled this way? And it came back saying, no, this is definitely Sardinia. But notice how I've been pronouncing these words. I've been trying to really hit that A in Sardinia really hard because that turns out to be the key here. After a bit more reading of this document and also looking at Claude's initial transcription, I am 100% sure that this is a document about Sardinia. It's because there's some city names in Folio 29V that correspond to cities in Sardinia, and then also the name of the person mentioned in the fourth line, Mosen Ximenes Perez de Araños, Gobernador. He was the governor, the Crown of Aragon's governor of Sardinia at this time. So this is absolutely a letter about Sardinia, and it looks like the spelling of Sardinia could be Cerdenya, as it appears at the bottom of Folio 29R. And the real key to understanding whether you're reading something about Sardinia or Sardinia is what comes after the D in the middle. If you're seeing an A, then it's probably the region near the Pyrenees called Sardinia. And if you're seeing the letter E, as is very clear here, you're probably reading about the island of Sardinia. So there you have it. It's a difference that, to my eye, was not one that I could recognize initially, but now we'll see what comes up later. Now, Sardinia, let's talk about the history of this island. Sardinia was incorporated into the Crown of Aragon as the Crown of Aragon made this amazing Mediterranean expansion in the course of the 14th century. And a lot of that expansion happened under the reign of Joan's father, Pere the Ceremonious. But I'm pretty sure that the Catalan presence in Sardinia actually predates the reign of Pere the Ceremonious. It might even go back to the 13th century. I'm a little hazy on when it all starts. But the important thing to realize is that in the 14th century overall, the wealth generated from Catalan merchant activity allowed Barcelona to become a competitor to some of the Italian city-states, especially Genoa. So Genoa and the Crown of Aragon become major rivals in the Mediterranean. And they are at war for a lot of the years throughout the 14th century. And Genoa had a hold on the island of Sardinia, and the Catalan merchants and adventurers took it from Genoa. And then there's just a lot of kind of back and forth. It's basically that the Sardinians are trying to not be ruled by the Crown of Aragon, and the Crown of Aragon is very intent on keeping the island of Sardinia. Thomas Besson, in his book A Short History of the Crown of Aragon, he observes that Sardinia was a major farming and basically a breadbasket source for the Crown of Aragon. He kind of goes so far as to say that the farms on the island of Sardinia were basically feeding the people of Barcelona and Mallorca. So this island is incredibly valuable to the Crown of Aragon. But it seems like the people of Sardinia themselves, they're really more connected to Genoa. One of the leaders in Sardinia is Eleanor d'Arborea, and she actually has a lot of financial ties to Genoa, and also has some lineage in her ancestry from Genoa. But she herself was born actually on land in Aragon, and so she's a really interesting person. She's actually one of the women of the Middle Ages in Sardinia that is most commemorated in Sardinia today as one of the powerful women rulers in Sardinia's history, and also one of the greatest rulers in general for the island of Sardinia. So there's like a big statue of her in Sardinia, and also I think, what else can I say? Oh yeah, her titles. So she wasn't a queen. It's really interesting. I'm not quite sure about the translation of this title, but she's known as a judge, or like, if you're gendering it, a judgess. So the titles of the leaders of the various realms of Sardinia, there were like 4 different realms, and Arborea was one of them. Their titles are a little bit unusual, and can't quite exactly figure out what her title was. All right. So Eleanor d'Arborea is one of the main political leaders that organizes against the Crown of Aragon. And it seems to me that in 1386, there were no real rebellions against Catalan rule in Sardinia, but with the transition of power from Pere the Ceremonious to this new king, Joan, I think that the Sardinians see an opportunity to rise up and try to kick out the Catalan officials from Sardinia. And so that's what this letter is all about, that there's increasing resistance to the officials of the Crown of Aragon in Sardinia, and there is a need to raise up some soldiers. And the money is going to come from tithing, apparently, the people of Zaragoza and maybe Aragon in general. And that's why this letter is being addressed to the Archbishop of Zaragoza, in addition to 2 other officials who I'm not quite sure who they are. So we can see the need for money in the 5th line of folio 29V, where we see the phrase ab les dites compagnies e ab paga dels soldats nostros, who will then go there. So the soldats, these are soldiers, right? And the paga, the payment of the companies of the soldiers. So that's what the money is required for. And what's really, I think, a great thing to note is how Joan phrases the need to raise money. And that is 2 lines down. So I think now we're at line... Uh-oh, I just lost it. Oh, goodness. Line 7, in which he says, it's the 3rd word in, man levar diverses quantitats de moneda. And so he wants to have diverse quantities of money. He wants to raise, man levar. He wants to raise diverse quantities of money. I love that phrase. Like, what is what is going on there? I mean, he doesn't just say large. Maybe instead of saying like gigantic quantities of money, if he uses the word diverses, it doesn't sound as like shocking. So, I mean, I would think of the word diverse as sources, like from diverse sources of money, but he's got it right there with quantity. So I just think that's really interesting. And he does acknowledge on the next line that there is a real need for this because without it, he won't be able to avoid damage, dampnaches, that would be happening. That would the damages that would cause a loss. And then the next line after that, perdia a la nostra corona, a loss to the crown or from the crown of this island. So basically he's saying, look, if I don't get this money, then we're going to have damage to Nostra Corona, our crown, our realm. I think Corona is being used here to mean the realm, and I'm pretty sure it is actually. So there's just a lot of language in here about how there's an urgent need, how we don't want to have damage to the crown, how it's going to be required to pay a bunch of soldiers. And then at the end, it gets super urgent because he says in the last line before the dating clause that he needs this money now. So, lagni de pux die seria irreparable dampnage. Meaning that if it's, I think, well, we have to add in some of the stuff earlier in the sentence, but what that last phrase is saying is that if we don't get this money in a few days, then there will be seria, there will be irreparable damage. So this is what it sounds like when the king is trying to express urgency. I mean, other places in this letter, we have gran necessitat. We have all kinds of phrases throughout this letter that are conveying the great urgency. So does this mean that Joan got word that there's actually a very big effort being mustered by the opponents of the Crown of Aragon in Sardinia, and that really Sardinia could be lost by, the next couple days if they don't send soldiers in right away? That is kind of how the tone is for this letter. All right. It's all very urgent indeed. And I think that this letter, while it doesn't say anything about Joan and Violante and their cooperation or anything really explicitly about gender or such, it's still got this language about finances that is super interesting to anybody who is wanting to study the reign of Joan and Violante, because the major criticism of them from their opponents has to do with how they allegedly mismanaged money. And so we can see, like, right at the very beginning, like, just, in the third month of their reign, there's already trouble. You can't send soldiers to Sardinia to quell resistance there unless you somehow activate some weird funding source that originates from a ruling on about religious tithing. So it's just very odd that there isn't money already for something like this. It tells you a lot about the situation that Joan and Violante found themselves in. in terms of finances right at the outset of their rule. So I don't know if I can go so far as to say that they should be absolved of accusations of financial mismanagement, because they really did take out a whole lot of loans and all kinds of weird financial dealings with people like Lucino Scarampi. But I think it's just an important piece of the picture that we can glimpse here in this particular letter. One last thing, I guess I should have talked about this when I was talking about the paleography earlier, because this is another paleographical note, and one that also relates to use of AI. Notice how at the very end of the document, after the year, which once again the scribe has decided to spell out the number, set, right after that we have subsignata. So signata starts, subsignata, one word, starts on the second to last line, and then it's like there'd be a hyphen, and then nada in the signata is on the very last little line there. Subsignata ab nostra petite anel. For me, looking at it with my current abilities to read the paleography here, this is totally clear that what's being expressed is that Joan has used his small ring, anel, petite anel. The paleography is not messy. It's super clear. The presence of subsignata indicates that it's not a name of somebody, but both Gemini and Claude screwed this up. All right, so they got me on the fact that this was Sardinia and not Sardinia, but here I have mastery where they do not. Haha. And they're doing something so weird where it's like they're really insistent. Like, I told Claude, I corrected what I had gotten from Gemini, and I told Claude, this says subsignata ab nostra petite anel, but I pretended it was the Gemini output. I didn't say that it was my reading. But Claude would not go for it and insisted that this was a person's name. That what we sometimes see after the year is a person's name in some of these documents, but this is just, it's so weird that Claude is able to read a lot of the paleography in places in the document that are way more difficult to suss out the letters, but here it's just not doing it. It's not sticking to the letters as they are on the page. It's overriding what it's seeing with the pattern of the earlier letters where there are someone's name at the end after the year in the dating clause. So that's an interesting output from the large language models, and I'm not quite sure what that reflects. Maybe something like their dedication to patterns is something that will override some even obvious data that, I mean, it's obvious to the human eye, but to them is not going to be strong enough to override a pattern. So yeah, with those AI models, patterns are very, very powerful. And this is a good example of that. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Multcara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, maybe about the history of Sardinia, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.